may take a couple of extra minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly a great honor and a privilege for me to be invited to this very important conference, and then affording me with this opportunity to talk on a subject and sharing Pakistani perspective of how are we integrating the civilians and the military professions in securing our nation. Indeed, a very important and challenging subject, open to different interpretations. But given the short time that I have, I would like to attempt it from a practitioner's perspective, and then trying to relate it to the more current events. And the sequence that I intend following is as flashed. I'll build down my arguments based on the security challenges that we continue to confront and the legal framework in which the integration takes place, and then dwell in relatively longer in terms of arguments about the Pakistan's drive about the militancy. Now, next. Now, this is what is our understanding of security. In simple words, security is absence of a threat, which is to be achieved through synergetic employment of all elements of national power. It's not an exclusive domain of military. Military has a role, an important role to play, but the overall security, the national security construct comes from the interplay of the remaining elements of national power. As we look at it, we classify it into three broad segments: individual security, which is the function of the society; state security or the national security, which is again the function of the state; and then the international security obligations. And we all understand there's a degree of overlap between all three categories. Next. Before I talk about our security environments, let me at the outset admit that in Pakistan, the military has a very important and pronounced role concerning matters of national security. And it's because of the tough neighborhood and the set of environments in which we exist. And these are driven by certain events as flashed on the screen. First is, of course, the unfinished agenda of our partition, especially concerning Kashmir dispute, which ultimately led to three different wars with our eastern neighbor, 48, 65, and then 71. And then in 1979, we braced for the fallout of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, continued for almost a decade, and thereafter 9/11 happens. So all these things have added to our security concerns. There's a perpetual state of insecurity, and that's why you see military on the lead in most of the matters concerning national security. Next, please. But whatever military does or doesn't is governed by a set of certain rules and regulations. We have a proper legal framework which is enshrined in our constitution. The Article 245, it empowers the military, of course, under the supremacy of political leadership, for dealing with matters concerning national security, both conventional as well as non-conventional. This legal framework is augmented further by two different set of presidential ordinances, which is one is called the National Action Plan, which was enacted last year, and the other one is Protection of Pakistan Ordinance. This again empowers the military and the civilian components to operate in an integrated manner in dealing with militancy. Next. So this is the organizational structure of national security framework. At the top, at the apex level, is the Cabinet Committee of National Security, which is headed by the Prime Minister and attended by the concerned federal ministers and, of course, the services chief. We have a similar setup at the provincial level, which is headed by the provincial chief minister, and, of course, it has representation of all the professional, civilians, and military both. And at the execution level, we have that integration that takes place with various professionals depending upon the nature of tasks. Next. Now, with this premise, now I move to what we did and how this system is delivering, or has it delivered or not. And I'll relate it to our successes in a war against terror, spanning last 15 years. What you see on the slide on the right-hand corner is a map of Pakistan, and on the left top side you see a red area. That red area and the amplified reflection is on the left side, is a place called FATA, Federally Administered Tribal Area, which is very well known all over the world. It was taken to be almost synonymous to the global terrorism for the past 10, 11 years. Comprises 7 different agencies. Next. This is a very important slide. Please have a look and register the color code on the right bottom corner. Virtually, once 911 happened, no terrorist entity or organization existed. It was absolutely clear of any insurgents. It was firmly under government's control. And try to locate if there is any red color or a yellow color. But then something drastic happens. In the next 8 years, now this was the spread of terrorism in this area. Go to next slide, please. Now see the mammoth spread of terrorism, and it was at the peak of militancy by May 2009. In fact, government control areas were getting restricted. The militants from all over the world were converging into this area. And then, in terms of threat oscillation, this is how the situation looked like in May 2009. The Tehreek-e-Taliban had morphed into a Frankenstein. It was the largest terrorist organization, was shielding and harboring the remaining international global terror organizations, TTA, Al-Qaeda, IMU, name it, and everything was available, headquartered and entrenched in FATA. Next, please. Well, something happened between 2009, as we take a fast forward to 2016, last 8-9 years. Now this is the situation. It is with a lot of pride that we reveal and share with our friends and allies that militancy and terror networks have been simply decimated from Pakistan and from FATA region, of course. But all the success came with a heavy price. The nation laid and paid through blood and tire. Over 60,000 lives were lost, including 6,000 security personnel. The first slide shows some of the general officers, 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars. They all laid their life to preserve national security. Next. Well, these are real heroes. Parade Lane, they're all children of army officers. Those were butchered mercilessly, 2009. Next. And 2 years ago, the Army Public School massacre, the famous one, 148 kids. They were butchered mercilessly under the most horrendous manners. This is where the nation got galvanized. So there was the point that I'm trying to make is there's a heavy price that the nation has paid, not only for its own security, but for the global security as well. Cost of war. The only prime minister, the first Muslim prime minister of Islamic world, Nazir, she was targeted by the militants. Malala Yousafzai, 3 years ago, she was barely 15 years old, and she stood for education in that part of the world, and she was gunned down by the militants. Luckily, she survived. Next. Economic loss, it's hard to determine. The direct loss is estimated to be about 118 billion. But more importantly, it was a retardation of economic growth. We are embroiled in this war for the past 16 years. If we were not embroiled there, Pakistan would have been a different picture altogether. These are the consequences for getting into a war, not for yourself, but for the good of the international community as well. Next. More importantly, the damage to the national image, repute, and the very makeup of our social fiber. Next, please. But again, it was the military with a complete national support that decimated the terror networks through a very well-crafted 3D strategy. Now, this strategy is very important. Now, this slide shows the makeup of the strategy. It had 3 broad constituents: dialogue, deterrence, and development. Deterrence was meant for the hardcore militants. Kindly go back on the 3D strategy. So deterrence was for the militants, the hardcore militants and their support network. The dialogue was for the reconcilable elements and for the masses, so as to win them back over and not to let them drift into the terrorist fold. And the development, of course, was to address their grievances. The first component,